Have you ever been alone at a train station in the dead of night? The eerie silence, the flickering lights, and that creeping feeling you're not alone? Well, what happened to me will make you think twice about waiting for the last train. This is my true, spine-chilling encounter with a ghost at a deserted station. It was one of those nights where everything seems to go wrong. I was running late after work, missed my usual train, and ended up stuck at this desolate, barely functional station. I won't name the place. If you know, you know. But it's one of those old, creepy stations with cracked tiles, dim fluorescent lights that flicker, and graffiti everywhere. It was around midnight. The place was completely empty, except for me. No staff, no passengers, just the sound of the wind howling through the tunnels. I checked the schedule. The next train wasn't due for another hour. With nothing to do, I sat on one of those freezing metal benches. My phone was at 5%. So I had to conserve the battery, but honestly, I didn't feel like scrolling. Something about the silence was wrong. You know that feeling when you're being watched? I had it the second I stepped onto that platform. Then the lights started flickering. At first, I thought it was just bad wiring. This station looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades, but the flickering was almost rhythmic, like something was intentionally turning them on and off. I laughed nervously to myself, but deep down, I felt it. This wasn't going to be a normal night. I tried to shake it off. I pulled out my headphones and listened to some music to calm my nerves, but the silence of the station was overpowering, even over the music. And then it happened. I heard footsteps. They were faint at first, coming from the far end of the platform. I paused my music and listened. The steps grew louder, echoing in the empty station. I turned, expecting to see someone, maybe a late-night commuter like me, but there was no one. The footsteps stopped as soon as I looked. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was an echo or the wind. I sat back down, but my heart was racing. That's when I saw it, a figure, sitting at the opposite end of the platform. At first, I thought it was just another passenger. They were sitting completely still, hunched over on a bench. I squinted to get a better look. The person was wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, like something out of a 1940s movie. It struck me as odd. Who dresses like that anymore? And where had they come from? I'd been alone at the station for at least 20 minutes. I decided to ignore them. Maybe they'd been there all along, and I just hadn't noticed. But something about them kept nagging at me. They didn't move, not a single twitch or shift in posture. Then I blinked. Got up and walked away, gone. Just gone. I stood up, my heart pounding. I walked to the edge of the platform, peering down both sides of the tracks. Nothing. The station was empty again. And then, the temperature dropped. I don't mean a slight chill. I'm talking bone-numbing cold. My breath came out in white puffs, and my hands started to shake. It didn't make sense. This was late spring, and it had been warm all day. The footsteps started again, louder this time, like boots slamming against the ground. They were circling me, but there was no one there. I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice echoed back at me, but no one answered. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me, a deep, guttural groan, like someone in pain. I spun around and saw the figure. They were back, but this time, they were on the tracks, staring up at me. Their face was in shadow, but I could see their hands, gray and skeletal, with long, jagged nails. They lifted one hand, pointing directly at me. I froze. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure stepped closer, their feet not touching the ground, gliding toward me. The lights above flickered violently, plunging the station into darkness for a second before coming back on. Each time the lights flickered, the figure was closer. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my bag. And then they spoke. The voice wasn't human. It was layered, like dozens of voices speaking at once, overlapping each other. They said, "Why are you here?" I stammered, "I'm just waiting for the train." The figure tilted their head, as if confused. Then they said something I'll never forget. "No one leaves." At that moment, I heard a train approaching. The sound was deafening. The roar of the engine, the screeching of the wheels. I turned toward the tracks, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, the figure was gone. The cold disappeared, and the lights stopped flickering. It was as if nothing had happened. but I knew better. I grabbed my bag and bolted toward the exit. As I climbed the stairs, I heard one last sound, a ghostly laugh echoing through the station, followed by a whisper, "See you soon." When I finally got home, it was almost 3 a.m. My hands were still shaking, my throat dry from the screaming I didn't even remember doing. The entire ride home, I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, terrified I'd see that figure again. On the train, in the windows, or standing at the next stop. But nothing happened. It was as if the terror had been left behind at the station. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I slammed my door shut the second I got inside, locked it, and turned on every light in my apartment. I sat down on my couch, trying to catch my breath, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept asking myself, what just happened? Was it real? Or was I losing my mind? But then I noticed something strange. My bag, the one I'd thrown over my shoulder in my rush to escape, was damp. Not just damp, soaking wet, like it had been submerged in water. But it hadn't rained that night, and I hadn't gone near anything wet. I opened the bag, and inside, my notebook was ruined, the ink smudged and pages warped. But one thing stood out. There was something written on the last page. I hadn't written it. The words were jagged, almost like they'd been scratched into the paper. It said, "Do not come back." My heart stopped. I threw the bag across the room and just stared at it, unable to move. How had it gotten there? I hadn't seen anyone near my bag, and I hadn't stopped running from the moment I'd left the station. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that I must have accidentally spilled something on the bag and written the note myself without remembering. But deep down, I knew the truth. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started searching online, trying to find any explanation for what had happened at the station. That's when I stumbled on an old news article. It was dated back to the 1940s, and the headline read, "Local man dies in apparent suicide at station name." I clicked on it, and the story sent chills down my spine. A man in his late 30s had thrown himself in front of an oncoming train at the station. Witnesses claimed he was wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. But here's where it gets even stranger. The article mentioned that several people had reported seeing him after his death. Commuters talked about a shadowy figure pacing the platform late at night. Others claimed to hear whispers or feel an unexplainable cold breeze as they waited for the train. The station eventually became notorious for these encounters, and rumors spread about it being haunted. The man was nicknamed the Phantom of the Tracks, but as time passed, the story faded into local folklore. That wasn't the end of it. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening in my apartment. It began with small, almost unnoticeable things. Objects moving from where I left them, faint knocking sounds in the middle of the night, and the lights flickering when they'd never done that before. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was coming from the apartment above mine, but as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't. The sound was coming from inside my apartment. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a lamp. I walked through the apartment, turning on lights as I went, but there was no one there. Just as I was about to go back to bed, I heard it again. This time, it came from my living room. I turned the corner, and there it was, my bag. The one I'd thrown across the room the night I came home from the station. It was sitting in the middle of the floor, but I hadn't put it there. I stood frozen, staring at it. Slowly, I approached, and as I got closer, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a single footprint next to the bag. It wasn't mine. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I called in sick to work and went to the library to do more research on the station. What I found made everything worse. The man who had died wasn't just a random commuter. He had been a station worker, one who'd been accused of deliberately causing a train accident that killed several passengers. The townspeople had blamed him for the tragedy, and consumed by guilt and fear, he'd ended his own life. But here's the thing. The station was never the same after that. Over the decades, there were dozens of reports of strange sightings, unexplained deaths, and train conductors hearing phantom screams as they passed through. One of the most chilling stories I read was about a woman who claimed to have seen the man on the tracks, just like I did. She said he spoke to her, just as he'd spoken to me. And a week later, she disappeared. The article ended with a warning. If you ever find yourself at this station after dark, don't wait. Leave immediately. Because the phantom of the tracks doesn't just haunt, he follows. After everything that happened, I moved. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. But even now, I still feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes, when I'm out late, I feel that same cold breeze. And every once in a while, I'll hear footsteps behind me. So, if you're ever stuck at a train station late at night, especially one that feels wrong, do yourself a favor, leave. Because whatever I saw that night, it's still out there, waiting.